morning, everybody. So nice to see so many familiar faces. Sorry.
Oh, there's water down there. Sorry, I forgot to tell you.
So yeah, thank you, Henry, for introducing us. So we've got a pretty big title here when it comes to looking at the fundamentals of strategy and design. But we really hope in the next 20 minutes that what we're going to be able to do is really set some of the context for you for the rest of the day. So helping to get into that mindset of thinking about when talking to any of the experts, when you're talking to your peers, when you're listening to any of the base camps, how to think about that in that kind of really strategic way, but also when you think about what are your end goals, and if that is looking at design, if that's looking at automation, how do you build all of that together? So this is a bit of a brief overview of what we are going to talk about, but actually what we are going to do today is tell you a bit of a story about where we put our money where our mouth is, and tell you a bit about how we brought you here today, so how we built our own strategy around the summit, how we built our own emails and some of the challenges we came up against, and how we overcame some of that. So first I want to talk to you a little bit about what the function actually is of an email strategy. So for many of you in the room, you probably have a marketing strategy or specifically a digital one, and for some of you, you may even have specifically an email marketing strategy. But for me, there are three really main kind of key important things about why you should have an email strategy. So it gives you that content and direction, it gives you somewhere to work towards, it gives you a stake in the ground, something to be able to measure yourselves against so that you can understand whether you have been successful or not. It allows you to start to think about some of the tactics you need to deploy along the way so that you can get to that end point when you're thinking about what is success to you. And lastly, what's so important is to be able to build that relationship with your customers over time. We've already heard from Sean about customer experience. That's something that we are massively passionate about as to how we help our customers to develop that relationship through email to be able to deliver more of a one-to-one communication. So those are the kind of short-term, it's a short-term view of how we look at a strategy. And actually these are some of the medium-term things as to why, what's the impact of having a strategy for your customers. And there are two main things to think about here. It's really to understand that the impact is around building that trust with your customers. So trust is all about when they see an email from you, they see your name, they understand that you're going to send them something that's relevant, then you're not sending them something that they're not going to be interested in, that's going to turn them off. And secondly, it's thinking about how do you build that loyalty with them. Retaining the customers that you have is the most important thing. Being able to develop a relationship over time, respond to their needs, respond to their behaviours, that's how you really begin to build that loyalty so that they stick to you as a brand and that they don't go anywhere else. And all of those things come together to really focus on what the long-term impact and function of a strategy is, and that's to support these two areas that customers and relationships exist over time. So at any point that somebody starts their journey with you, that's just the beginning point. That's the start of a long journey in which it's our job as marketers to be able to deliver communications along that pathway that helps support them and push them forward. And email is a channel that is able to do that in a very subtle way. It allows for first-person data, it allows people to tell you things about themselves, it allows you to respond to their emails as well. And secondly, it's thinking that customers see a series of communications. It's about looking at how do we see email campaigns as a whole. How do we look at, okay, if we're looking at something like Black Friday or we're looking at Christmas, what's the impact of having that particular campaign on its own, but what are we learning from that particular campaign for the future? What data are we learning about customers? What things are we learning about what they like in terms of emails? How is that helping us to infer the relationship with them as we go on?
So interactivity in email isn't a fundamental of design, but increasing engagement is. For a long time, the email's been the poor coding relation of the website, beyond adding basic mobile responsiveness in up until recently only a handful of clients. The world of email development has not moved on very much. On the other side, though, the shiny knights of user interaction development on the website have had entire UI movements and trends come and go. The whole world of mobile apps has grown up around them. And those apps have taught users a whole new set of tools that they can use for their common behaviors, whether it's expanding different bits of content in interesting ways or using mobile menus. And in more recent times, with the proliferation of mobile views, the further support in lots more email clients, and the introduction of CSS3, which has meant far less reliance on things like JavaScript and Flash, which don't work in email, a whole new suite of interaction has become possible in email. And the benefit for us as email marketers in being so far behind the curve in that sense is that we've been able to leverage all of that experience and learnings that people have got from mobile websites or apps. And we can start to use that to our advantage because it means we can start delivering things in email that people understand, but in a medium that they're not really expecting, which means the emails become a bit more fun and we're able to deliver more of an experience rather than just sending out content.
So we'd like to tell you a bit of a story, as I said at the beginning, and telling stories is quite a fine art, and those that tell stories really well really understand how it resonates with their end audience. They understand what content, what context to deliver the story in, and I mean this across all of our lives. I'm not just talking about in email. We all tell stories differently to different friends depending on what they do and don't know about us. So for some of you, today will be the first time that you've been to the summit. For some of you, you'll have been before. So when we began to sit down and think about the journey for the particular communications to get you here today, we had to take into consideration all of those objectives, that all of you have different reasons for being here, you're all different companies, you all have your own different goals. So we had to sit down and think about our 4 main objectives here. So we have to think about what actions did we want you to take with those emails? What sort of things did we want to learn from the actions that you took from those emails? Why should you guys care about what we have to say when we send you an email? Why, for both of us in our partnership, does it matter that you care what we say? Who should we invite? We have thousands of customers, as we've already said, thousands of end users, we've already said. So it's thinking about within that customer base, who specifically we should invite. And lastly, and most importantly, is how do we measure this? You know, we can put all of these things into play, we can put all of the email communications into an automated program, but if we don't sit down at the end and decide how we're going to measure whether this is successful or not, we'll never know. So one of the important things for us to consider is that the summit today is a moment in time in the relationship and the partnership that we have with you guys over the time that you're with us as a customer. And we just wanted to illustrate some of the things that happen around the summit today. So all the resources, the teams that are available here at Adestra, how that all fits into the wider journey that you have with us. Much like thinking about, you know, like a side quest in a computer game, that's how we see the summit today, as something that supports that whole journey. But actually what we're doing is we're learning certain data points about you, we're learning what you're interested in, we're learning how to communicate with you, we're learning how you interact with email specifically, and all those things help us to build up a kind of inventory about you. And we do this using our 8 marketing success pillars. What these allow us to do is to be able to set a framework to look at the priorities that we wanted to focus on when it came to sitting down and reviewing those objectives. So we started planning pretty much back in January. This is one of the very first meetings that we sat down and thought about. And actually in this we identified from those 8 pillars that we have some of the things that mattered to us. So it was important that we looked at how we automated that content. We wanted to be able to set up a series so that it was left to run and we could kind of and the marketing team could get on with their day-to-day jobs. We wanted to look at how we could personalize it. So, you know, we've asked you guys to choose what base camps you wanted. How did we then use that within the email to be able to make that personal? We wanted to look at all the data points that we have. How could we integrate that into the system? And then lastly, thinking about how do we test the campaign? What are we trying to find out at the end?
And I've never been in a meeting with Suzy where she didn't immediately want to start defacing the nearest surface with her toddler-like scrawlings. But when we were doing these planning sessions, we wanted to treat them in exactly the same way as we would if we were coming to see one of you guys. So we interrogated all of our own success criteria, all of our own business goals, and made sure that all of the communications and all of the planning for the day itself not only were consistent with each other, but did wrap up into those goals. And most importantly, we wanted to get as far ahead of the game as possible so that we could understand the whole journey before it came to putting any pen to paper when it came to design. So this is just a little piece of the automation program that came together, and it's not actually that complicated. It's long, it goes on for quite a lot longer than this. But it's not hugely complicated, but it does take into account all of the different types of journeys that you might go on, whether they are like a physical, I have registered or I haven't registered, but also I've clicked through, but I didn't register, I opened, but I didn't click, and allowed us to really understand all of the different journeys that people might go on, and then build the content around that. And then it came to the point where we picked up our digital design crayons and started thinking about what we actually wanted to make it all look like and how it wanted to work. And when we talk about journey for the campaign as a whole, the journey is just as important when it comes to visuals. Design can excite and engage people, but it should also reassure. I think that's probably the most important thing that design, especially when it comes to email, should do. On a baseline, that just means getting your branding, your tone, and your content right. Because when you see a from name from an email, as I think Sean was saying earlier, when you see the from name, you have an immediate expectation of the sort of things you're going to see when you open that email. And it's super important that those two things line up. And it's one of the reasons why really, I say good, I don't mean good, but good malicious phishing emails, that some of those do really well, and it's really apparent when they get it wrong. So the ones that do well don't just look like they've come from Amazon, but they've got the content and they've got the tone right as well. There's no obvious spelling mistakes. But it's much obviously more important when you're sending proper emails to people. If people trust your brand, but that trust isn't upheld when they open the email, it will switch people off really quickly. If you've got a plan and you've sat down and you've done all your strategic thinking, you've interrogated all of those success criteria and you're confident in what you're going to put forward, design is just the cherry on the top of that. But that doesn't mean it can't be the success or failure of that whole campaign. And not just that campaign, it will also influence people's future likelihood of opening your emails. If you consistently deliver reassuring, exciting, good content, right branded, faithful tone emails, then people will understand that that's always going to happen, and they're much more likely to open up and look at your emails. And in that way, design can have an impact on open rates as well as engagement once they've got the email open. But it doesn't mean that every time you send an email, it's got to have every bit of interaction, every bit of animation, or every trick in the book in it. It just means it gets those base things right, and it feels like it's part of that same journey. And that journey, as we've said already, it starts with people's first interaction with you, and it continues through every step of that. So we'd already decided the success criteria for the campaign, and the main one obviously was to get you all here today. But the digital design team and I had our own goals, because we're doing something for ourselves. It gave us an opportunity to have a proper play. So we looked at some lots of different techniques that we could do, some that we'd done before, some that were brand new to us, and wanted to make sure that it was exciting for us and that we were really pushing ourselves as far as we could go. But it wasn't just selfish, because having this level of interaction can help create the little pause that's needed with people. I've talked about it a lot of times, but a lot of people only read their emails so that they haven't got any unread emails. So the ability to just create a little noise of surprise in people, just that little pause, is enough to interrupt their behaviour, and then you can grab them with the really good content that you've already planned out. And the other benefit of having some of these interactive elements within an email is that it means people spend longer playing around with it. The email becomes like a fun experience for them, and they're more likely to then consume more content without feeling like they're just scrolling forever and ever. Furthermore, as I talked about this time last year, we're all about creating templates, and we're all about putting tools in your hands so that you can make your own exciting journeys. So another goal for us was to see if we could, was to see if we could create these interactive elements at a scale, so put them into our email editor and allow our marketing team to curate all of the content, not least because it meant that we didn't have any last-minute panics. We could get all of this done much earlier in the year and leave them to it. And obviously we were able to do that. And it was a reminder to me that our editor is still just as exciting as it was 2 years ago when we unveiled it at this event. And not only were we able to code the interaction in the email, but using one of the latest features of the platform, we were able to give the marketers the ability to update their own conditions within that, so they could use highly reactive personalization as the campaigns went through, based on things that you were doing, whether that was your interactions or whether that was just these are the base camps and these are the topics that I'm interested in seeing more of. It wasn't without its challenges though. We had an interesting time of kind of having to react to the sort of things that are normally the point at which we get involved with you guys. So one of them was that as part of our registration form, we had this ability to choose your preference of order of the base camps you attended. It was a nice, cool little drag and drop bit of UI. But what we noticed after the first couple of hundred registrations was that people's choices very closely matched the order that we'd got on here. So we weren't sure whether that was because that we were somehow psychic and we knew the order of things people were going to be interested in, or whether it was just that people bypassed this completely and just submitted the form without choosing anything. So a couple of weeks ago, we sent another email out just saying, hey, these are the two choices that you've prioritized. Are these still the two that you're interested in? Would you like to come and change them? And actually, although the numbers changed a little bit, it turns out we are just psychic, and we did get it right. This is the order you wanted. And of course, the other challenge was our age-old friend, Outlook. Outlook has long been the bane of any email developer's life. It works in a totally different way. It's not even a little bit like all of the other email clients. And the older versions of Outlook are actually much, much friendlier. So in this chart here, you can see what the level of support for all of the elements that we had in there was. Outlook is the big bad no from Stop It and Tidy Up, which is a far too old a reference for me to be using. And actually, animated GIFs are pretty much the only thing that work pretty consistently, although obviously not in Outlook. But that didn't mean that we shouldn't do it. We wanted to deliver these exciting things, and although we knew a lot of you were likely to be on Outlook, there's also going to be a large percentage of people that are opening those emails on their mobiles. And if you were a B2C company and you were thinking about doing this sort of thing, then there's a really good chance that you've got 70% plus of your audience on mobile. And if you took a look at what the stats were for those guys, everything works. So there's absolutely no reason not to do it. But just because something doesn't work also doesn't mean you don't do it. What we decided early on was that we weren't actually going to try and deliver the same experience to everybody, because that would have meant dumbing down everything. And if there's one thing that I hate, it's things being fine, because fine doesn't allow you to elevate at all above what everyone else is doing. So all it meant was we took a look at the interactive elements, we took a look at the stuff that wasn't going to work in places like Outlook and in some versions of Gmail and wherever else, and we just designed a different journey for people. Hopefully the content was interesting enough that it didn't matter that people did have to scroll a little bit, and we only still had to send and design and code one email. We just had to design stuff so that whatever people saw, we understood what that was going to be. And it wasn't that we had really great email for some people and then it broke for everyone else, and it wasn't that the people that could see the really exciting stuff just saw something fairly mundane. Everybody got a good experience. And so how did we do? So engagement levels were really great with all of the interactive elements. We've had a lot of conversations with people already about how we created that. Could we roll that out to them? Is that something that we could talk about? We were able to make the interactive elements work everywhere. We've got the editor working with those, and you're all here today. So there's obviously a good level of success in that.
So as I said at the beginning, 20 minutes is a short amount of time to be able to talk about such a huge topic, two such huge topics. But we hope that what you've taken away from this is that although there are lots of things that you can begin to look at within email, interactivity is something that we've touched on because that's something that we used in our own summer emails. It's thinking about all of those topics are almost meaningless if you haven't done a lot of that work that comes prior to that, a lot of that sitting down and asking yourselves those questions. Anyone that's been in a meeting with me will know that I ask 1,000 questions before we even get to the point of looking at what the solution is. Because I think all those questions where you're asking yourself what matters to you as a business, what matters to your customers, how do you want to get your brand consistency across, how do you want to develop that customer journey, all of that thought process comes before you think about the content or the kind of imagery or any of the collateral that you've got to deliver in your campaigns. And I think that's why, you know, if anything that you think about today when you're going around into the base camps and you're talking to people, is thinking about what is that customer experience that you want to deliver to your customers. How does email fit into that? How are you going to measure if that was successful? And if it's not successful, how are you going to look to elevate that? How are you going to look to make improvements? And we've talked a lot about design as well, and Rob's talked a lot in detail about some of the aspects of design, things that do and don't work. And design has a big part in playing that big part in delivering that journey to your customers. But without that strategic part at the beginning, that's also meaningless. So thank you so much for listening. And if anyone does have any questions, then we'll be outside. Thank you.